Do you enjoy the idea of winning your solo queue games automatically when the game reaches 30 minutes? Do you want to one-shot people without them having any counterplay? And more importantly, do you want to reach your ranked goal before the season ends? If yes, then this is the perfect video for you. This video is specifically made for the end of season 12. I made this video for all those people out there that desperately want to reach their dream rank before the end of the season, specifically for Vladimir players. I already made a detailed Vladimir guide in which I cover basically everything that you should know if you want to master Vladimir. For example, in that video I talk about the matchup tier list for Vladimir, I talk about all the different rune setups, etc. However, in this video I'm not going to go into as much detail as the previous one, since the purpose of this video is to help you climb with Vladimir, specifically in the period starting from right now until the end of the season, which is not that long anymore. Okay, so I'm going to do the following. I'm going to teach you a specific way of playing Vladimir that in my opinion is by far the most optimal way to play Vladimir in solo queue at this moment. This playstyle that I'm going to share with you is an approach that I have been using for a while now, and I have also noticed that Elite 500, which is the best Vladimir player in the world, has also adopted this playstyle ever since he started playing on the Korean servers. I've used this playstyle in the past, but I never really saw Elite use it as well. Now that he's also abusing it, I feel comfortable to say that this is the most broken way to play Vladimir, specifically at this point in time. Alright, let's get on with it. It all starts with the build path. Vladimir has two main build paths. First we have the Rocket Belt build, and second we have the Night Harvester build. It's important to understand the reasoning behind everything that makes this playstyle what it is, so that you would learn this playstyle to the best of your ability, so that's why I'm going to explain the difference between the two builds, and more importantly, I'm going to share with you the reasoning that goes behind it. First of all, it's important to understand that one of Vladimir's biggest weaknesses is his high cooldowns. His damage in early game is actually not that low. It's just that his ability cooldowns are so high that you can't really trade favorably with your opponents because they can oftentimes use their abilities twice in the same time that you can use your abilities only once. You can solve this issue by building items that give you ability haste, such as Rocket Belt and Night Harvester. These are two mythic items. Mythic items have a mythic passive. The Rocket Belt mythic passive gives you flat magic penetration, and the Night Harvester mythic passive gives you extra ability haste. Now that we know that, let's analyze the two different main build paths on Vladimir. Alright, let's start with the first build, the Rocket Belt build. Alright, so as your first item, you're going to build your mythic item, which is Rocket Belt. We already established that Vladimir needs a lot of ability haste in order to become useful. We've also established that Rocket Belt doesn't give you as much ability haste as Night Harvester. This means that if you build Rocket Belt, you'll need extra items that give you ability haste. That's why when you build Rocket Belt that your second item should always be Cosmic Drive, because this is a very gold efficient item that gives you extra ability haste. Now I think we can all agree that Vladimir is one of the biggest scaling champions in the game. However, in order to be strong, that means that you already need some items, which might take a while. There's no point in scaling if by the time that you finally become strong and finally scaled, the game is already over. This is why you want to build Death Cap as soon as possible on Vladimir, so that you can be strong and impactful before the game is over. However, if you go to Rocket Belt build, we've established that we need ability haste for our second item. This means that we can build Death Cap the earliest as our third item. This will usually be somewhere around the 27-minute mark, which is already quite late. By that time, the game might have already been decided. On top of that, there's another problem. Since people know that Vladimir is a very strong champion once he gets some items, they might build Magic Resist to reduce your damage. You can counter that by building Void Staff, which gives you percentage magic penetration. However, as we've already established, if we go to Rocket Belt build, we need to go Cosmic Drive for our second item so that we have enough ability haste, and we need Death Cap as a third item so that we can be impactful before the game is over. This means that we can build Void Staff the earliest as our fourth item, which is very late. So with this Rocket Belt build, we have two serious problems. First of all, we can only build our Death Cap as a third item, which means we will usually get it somewhere around the 27-minute mark, which is quite late. Secondly, we can only buy our Void Staff as a fourth item, which is also very late into the game. This is where the Night Harvester build comes in. If we build Night Harvester, then we already have all the ability haste we need through Night Harvester's mythic passive. This means that we don't need to buy Cosmic Drive after Night Harvester. This allows us to build Death Cap as a second item and Void Staff as a third item. The Night Harvester build basically allows you to be very strong quite early in the game. Instead of having to wait 30 minutes to scale, you can already be an absolute monster at 20 minutes or even before that. Alright, now that we covered the main differences between the Rocket Belt build and the Night Harvester build, let's sum up the strengths and weaknesses of both builds. Let's start with the Rocket Belt build. First of all, it scales extremely well. Since Rocket Belt gives you extra magic penetration through its mythic passive, it scales better than the Night Harvester build. Secondly, you already have built-in mobility. Rocket Belt's active is a decent gap closer, which means if you go Rocket Belt, you don't need to completely rely on your runes and summoner spells for mobility. Specifically, this means that if you go Rocket Belt, you don't need Phase Rush plus Ghost and Flash. You could perfectly go Flash Ignite or Flash Teleport and you would still have a decent amount of mobility because of your Rocket Belt active. Okay, now let's look at the weaknesses. If you go the Rocket Belt build, it will take you quite a long time to scale. The game might already be over by the time you have scaled. This is because you can only build Deathcap as a third item and Void Staff as a fourth item. Secondly, the early build components of Rocket Belt are very suboptimal for playing Vladimir. Rocket Belt basically consists of components that give you flat damage, but they don't give you any ability haste, which is what you really need. In general, but specifically in hard matchups, the first item you should buy is Fiendish Codex. Fiendish Codex gives you raw ability power and a good amount of ability haste. This helps you spam your abilities more during the laning phase, which means that you can do more damage and more importantly, you can spam your Q more to sustain the enemy's damage. However, if you build Fiendish Codex and you're planning on going the Rocket Belt build, then you will stall your first item Power Spike with Rocket Belt because Fiendish Codex is not a component of Rocket Belt. Now let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of the Night Harvester build. Let's start with the strengths. First of all, you spike very hard and insanely fast. The one item Power Spike of Night Harvester is insanely OP. Once you bought Night Harvester, you can basically fist fight anyone in the game. In my eyes, the item is extremely broken. And when you reach the point of having both Night Harvester and Deathcap, once again you spike insanely hard. Another strength of Night Harvester is its build path. Like I already mentioned, when playing Vladimir, oftentimes you'll want to buy Fiendish Codex as your first item, since it's such a gold efficient item that gives you all the stats you need to survive or even to dominate the laning phase. Now it happens to be that Fiendish Codex is part of the Night Harvester's build path, which means building Fiendish Codex will not stall your one item Power Spike if you go Night Harvester. Alright, before we decide that this build is truly so amazing, let's look at the weaknesses of this build. If you build Night Harvester and you damage an enemy champion, you will get extra movement speed for 1.5 seconds. However, this means that in order to proc that extra movement speed, you already have to be in range to attack your enemies. Now, the biggest problem of Vladimir in teamfights is that he has low mobility. Once you get close to people, it's not that hard to stay on them as Vladimir, but it's not always as easy to get close to them in the first place, and without the Rocket Belt active, it's even harder. This means that when you go Night Harvester, you need mobility from your summoner spells and runes. This means specifically that most games you will need Ghost plus Flash for your summoner spells and Phase Rush as your rune setup. Secondly, the Night Harvester build scales a bit worse than the Rocket Belt build. Night Harvester's mythic passive gives you ability haste and the Rocket Belt mythic passive gives you extra magic penetration. It should be quite obvious that you're going to scale better with extra magic penetration than with extra ability haste. However, in my opinion, the difference in scaling is not even that big. Now that we covered the strengths and weaknesses of both build paths, you should have noticed something. First of all, the strengths of the Night Harvester build strongly outweigh the strengths of the Rocket Belt build. Now let's look at the weaknesses of both build paths. There's no easy fix or optimal fix to the weaknesses of the Rocket Belt build. However, the weaknesses of the Night Harvester build are in fact easy to fix. Your lack of mobility can easily be compensated by going for mobility in your runes and summoner spells. And the fact that Rocket Belt scales a bit better than Night Harvester is not even a problem in my opinion. The entire idea of going Night Harvester is to end the game before you get to full build, and if that doesn't work, you're still a late game monster since the difference in scaling between the two builds isn't even that big. And that brings us to the actual setup and playstyle that I want to teach you in this video. Your rune setup should be Phase Rush and your summoner spells should be Ghost Flash, and obviously you're going the Night Harvester build. This way of playing Vladimir is defined by the following things. First of all, it's important that you don't play to kill your lane opponent. With Ghost Flash and Phase Rush you don't have any aggressive tools, so don't try to kill your lane opponent. Does that mean it's impossible to kill your lane opponent with this setup? No. But it shouldn't be your goal. Having this much mobility in your kit is extremely OP in teamfights, so that's where you want to shine. Let me repeat that once more. With this setup, you play for teamfights and not for lane priority. Now obviously this gives you two problems. One, If your goal is not to kill your opponent, then how will you ever get a lead? Well, first of all, you have your build path. If you go Night Harvester, you will automatically spike early so that you can teamfight early on. But how do you get your items fast without solo kills? The answer to that is very simple, by farming. Getting close to 10 CS per minute is crucial to make this playstyle work. Now, how do you get 10 CS per minute, or how do you get close to it? First of all, in the early laning phase, you're going to have to abuse wave mechanics. Especially in lower elos, this is very easy to do. You just need the wave to be close to your turret. If the wave is close to your turret, then the enemy will not try to fight you as much as he normally would, because every time he steps up, he will be vulnerable to getting ganked by your jungler. And if the enemy doesn't fight you that much, it's a lot easier for you to focus on last hitting the minions. Second of all, you should be taking jungle camps. Every single game, whenever your jungler is ganking or invading the enemy jungler, you can perfectly snatch your jungler's wolves and raptors. Once you are strong enough, you can even invade the enemy jungle and take their camps. And you should not only be doing this throughout the early laning phase, but throughout the entire game. Once the laning phase is done, it's important that you side lane at all times, whenever your summoner spells are on cooldown. This will allow you to farm a lot of minions and get a lot of solo XP. Without summoner spells, you're basically very weak in teamfights anyway, so this is the perfect time to go side lane. Once your summoner spells are back up, get your ass back to your teammates and force a teamfight. Alright, so we've already established that with this setup we cannot really contest the lane prio, so instead of fighting our lane opponent, we focus on farming. But that doesn't fix all our problems, does it? If you focus on farming and avoiding fights with your lane opponent is probably going to roam on the map to get themselves fed. Because sooner or later they will realize that farming against a Vladimir will not end up well for them, because Vladimir basically outscales every single mid laner in the game. So if you play passively on Vladimir, you're basically inviting your lane opponent to roam on the map. Now, how can you prevent them from roaming on the map? If you see that your lane opponent wants to move outside of the lane, walk up and trade aggressively with your opponent so that he simply cannot leave the lane. While you are trading with your opponent, the situation that made your opponent want to roam in the first place might already be over. But let's say it's not. Let's say after you traded with your opponent, there's still a situation on the map that your opponent could roam to. Then it's your goal to keep him as low health as possible. You have Ghost, Flash and Phase Rush. You can perfectly all-in your opponent and escape without dying. The goal here is not to kill your lane opponent, but rather to keep them so low that they can't roam anymore. If your enemy only has 200 HP left, he's probably not going to want to roam on the map anymore. It's very important here that you are not scared of using your ultimate and Ghost just to keep your enemy low so that he cannot roam. Roaming is the best way to counter a Vladimir, because that way you can win the game before the Vladimir has even scaled. So you as the Vladimir should do everything in your power to prevent the enemy from roaming, so please use your ultimate, use your Ghost, and don't be scared of all-laning people when they want to roam. Alright, now that we've covered the early laning phase part of this playstyle, let's fast forward to your first item power spike. Once you have Night Harvester, your goal should be to fight with your opponent, especially if your summoner spells are up. Night Harvester is by far one of the most broken items in the game, so it's essential that you use this power spike and try to fistfight your lane opponent. The same goes for your second power spike, which you will reach once you have Night Harvester and Rabadon's Death Cap. There's no point in side laning and scaling when you've already scaled. Once you have Night Harvester and Death Cap, you can basically 1v9 teamfights. So once you have these two items and your summoner spells are up, you need to force a fight, because if you play it correctly, you're going to win it. If you don't have summoner spells, it's okay to side lane and wait with fighting until they're back up. Now that's basically the complete setup that's going to help you climb during these last 2 months of the season. There are some exceptions to when you should be using Phase Rush and Night Harvester. For example, if you play versus a Sylas and you're going Phase Rush with Ghost Flash instead of Airy Scorch with Ghost Ignite, you're not going to be able to fistfight the Conqueror Sylas. However, for the sake of keeping this video fairly short, I'm not going to cover all the different exceptions to this build, because frankly, the season is going to be over in less than 2 months and you need all the experience you can get to get as comfortable as possible at this playstyle. So even into Sylas you can perfectly go Flash Ghost with Phase Rush. This Night Harvester, Phase Rush, Ghost Flash playstyle is extremely OP when played correctly. Early river skirmishes, early dragon fights, basically every early teamfight used to be scary for a Vladimir, because in early game you don't have the damage to carry the fights yet. So you want to scale in the side lane, but with this setup you should join teamfights once you have Night Harvester and your summoner spells. However, if you want to be strong and get to your Night Harvester and Death Cap early on, you need to have good farm. So keep in mind that during the laning phase, farming is your main priority. Alright, that's about everything I had to share with you. If you adopt this playstyle, you will definitely climb. Keep in mind that they might nerf Phase Rush or Night Harvester in the future, and then you won't be able to abuse it anymore, so please abuse this playstyle right now while you still can. Before I end the video, I want to thank you for watching. If you have any video suggestions at all, feel free to share them with me in the comment section. Also, if you want to be notified whenever I make a new video, feel free to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.